Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. This video is all about one author in particular, a Japanese crime author by the name of Keigo Higashino. He is one of the most widely read, most structurally brilliant and most emotionally deceptive crime novelists in contemporary Japanese literature. If you are new to Higashino, you might think you are entering the world of straightforward detective fiction, but you are not. What he does, again and again, is take the structure of the murder mystery and quietly reshape it into something far more unsettling, far more unique, far more surprising. They are not simply about solving crimes. Like many Japanese stories and Japanese novels, they also feature things about isolation and obsession, about moral compromise, about the ways that love can become destructive and intelligence can become dangerous. I want to focus on 6 of his major works: The Devotion of Suspect X, Journey Under the Midnight Sun, Malice, A Death in Tokyo, The Salvation of a Saint, and Newcomer. So let us begin with what is arguably his masterpiece, The Devotion of Suspect X. The premise of the story is deceptively simple. Yasuko Hanaoka is a single mother who kills her abusive ex-husband in a moment of desperation. Her teenage daughter is present and panic sets in. But their quiet neighbor, Ishigami, a high school mathematics teacher, overhears the commotion and intervenes. He offers, surprisingly and suspiciously, to take control of the situation. What follows is not a traditional whodunit, because, well, we know very early what happened. The question becomes, how can Ishigami possibly outmaneuver the police? Ishigami is one of Higashino's most extraordinary creations, socially withdrawn, emotionally stunted, but intellectually formidable. He is a mathematical genius living a life of quiet invisibility. His devotion to Yasuko is intense and unspoken and almost entirely internal. Across from him stands Detective Kusanagi and, more importantly, Dr. Yukawa, known as Galileo, a physicist whose analytical brilliance rivals Ishigami's own. The novel becomes a battle of intellects, but beneath the intellectual duel lies something far more tragic. Ishigami's crime is not motivated by greed or anger, but by his love, or maybe even an obsession, a self-erasing love. Higashino explores the idea that devotion, when unchecked, can actually become indistinguishable from self-destruction. The final revelation, right at the end, reframes the entire plot with a devastating blow. It is not merely clever, it is emotionally shattering. It moves at a very, very quick pace, and the reader is able to keep up with what is happening, but there is always this undertone that we're never quite certain how Higashino is helping. He's like feeding her answers, he gives her the alibis, there are things which don't quite add up, but it all comes to a very, very satisfying conclusion at the end. Next, we'll move into a darker and more expansive narrative in Journey Under the Midnight Sun. This novel begins with the unsolved murder of a pawn shop owner. Suspicion falls upon his son, Ryoji, and upon Yukiho, a young girl connected to the victim. However, the case stalls. Years pass. The narrative follows Ryoji and Yukiho across nearly 2 decades. Unlike The Devotion of Suspect X, this is not centered on a single event, but on a long, unfolding web of crimes: fraud, manipulation, blackmail, and death. Ryoji grows into a brilliant but shadowy figure, operating in the background of elaborate schemes. Yukiho becomes outwardly refined, elegant, and socially successful, yet behind her poised exterior lies something calculating and cold. What makes this novel extraordinary is its structure. Higashino often withholds direct access to the protagonist's thoughts. We observe them from the outside, through the perspectives of others, piecing together their psychology indirectly. Over time, a haunting possibility emerges that these 2 characters have been bound together since childhood by something tragic and irreparable. Thematically, this novel examines how early violence reshapes identity. It explores survival, trauma, class mobility, and the construction of false selves. There is a pervasive emotional darkness here, less about solving a puzzle and more about witnessing the long shadow cast by a single act. Next, we turn to Malice. This novel opens with the murder of a best-selling author, Kunihiko Hidaka. His body is discovered in his locked study. At first glance, this appears to be a classic locked room mystery. The prime suspect is almost immediately identified, Osamu Nonoguchi, a fellow writer and longtime acquaintance. However, Higashino dismantles expectations quickly. Nonoguchi confesses. He explains how he committed the murder. Case closed? Not at all. Detective Kaga, one of Higashino's most compelling recurring investigators, senses something incomplete. The mechanics of the crime may be solved, but the motive does not sit right. As Kaga digs deeper, he uncovers layers of professional jealousy, resentment, literary rivalry, and long-nursed humiliation. The brilliance of Malice lies in its psychological excavation. The question shifts from how was the crime committed to why, and the answer reveals something chilling about envy and the corrosive power of perceived injustice. Higashino shows how narratives, especially self-serving ones, can distort truth. It's also a novel about storytelling itself, about authorship, ego, and the lies we construct to justify ourselves. Next up, we have A Death in Tokyo, another installment in the Detective Kaga series. This novel begins with the murder of a woman found strangled in her apartment. At first, suspicion falls on a man who appears to have both motive and opportunity, but as Kaga investigates, the case expands outward into a web of strained relationships, concealed histories, and fragile family dynamics. Kaga is not merely an intellectual detective, he is deeply attentive to human behavior. His approach is patient, methodical, and empathetic. He observes tone, pauses, contradictions. As he interviews suspects and witnesses, Higashino allows his emotional currents beneath their words to surface gradually. The novel here emphasizes the quiet desperation that can exist within ordinary lives. Financial stress, social expectation, romantic disappointment, and these forces accumulate. Higashino demonstrates how murder can arise not from dramatic villainy, but from suffocating circumstances and emotional miscommunication. Next is The Salvation of a Saint, another Galileo novel and perhaps a spiritual companion to the devotion of Suspect X. In this case, a wealthy man is poisoned in his own home. Suspicion immediately falls on his wife. The problem, however, is that she appears to have an airtight alibi. The poison was administered in a way that should have been impossible given her location at the time of death. Once again, the tension does not come from identifying the likely culprit. The reader suspects the wife early on. The real question is how. Dr. Yukawa returns to unravel the scientific and logical puzzle, but beneath the mechanics lies a devastating emotional story again. The marriage at the center of the novel is hollow, strained by infidelity and emotional neglect. This is a story all about betrayal and resentment and the calculations that can simmer within domestic life. It is also a novel about control, about reclaiming agency in a relationship defined by imbalance. It is elegant, precise, and tragic. And finally, I come to Newcomer. Unlike the previous titles, Newcomer unfolds across multiple perspectives within a single Tokyo neighborhood. Detective Kaga is back again, and this time recently transferred to the area and begins investigating the murder of a middle-aged woman who lived alone. This is Higashino experimenting with structure. Each chapter focuses on a different local resident, a shopkeeper, a cafe owner, a family member, gradually revealing how their lives intersect with the victims. The murder investigation becomes a lens how we examine community, their loneliness and generational divides and unspoken regret. Kaga moves gently through these lives, listening more than accusing. The emotional core of the novel is less about suspense and more about understanding. Higashino paints a portrait of urban isolation and the fragile threads that connect neighbors who barely know one another. Across all these novels, certain themes recur: intellectual brilliance paired with emotional repression, love twisted into obsession, social isolation, and the quiet pressure of expectation. Perhaps most importantly, the instability of truth. Higashino repeatedly demonstrates that solving a crime does not necessarily restore moral clarity. Often, it simply reveals how complicated the human heart truly is. These books are not just puzzles to be solved, these are emotional traps, and when they close, they do it with devastating precision. Have you read any of Keigo Higashino's books yourself? Would you like to recommend any more to me? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, please like and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.